to have this conversation on visitor behavior and environmental stewardship through a regenerative storytelling lens. Y'all, this session is absolutely stacked. I don't have another way to describe it. The people on this panel are the best of the best. First, I would like to welcome back to the stage our moderator, Dr. Jonathon Day. Please put your hands together for Jonathon. And our panelists for this session, we have the professor and program coordinator at Paul Smith College. Please welcome Dr. Tiffany Rhodes. Next up, also somebody who has been instrumental in helping us think about this event and bring the right people in the room and do the right things. I just want to recognize her, and she is the advisor for the Center for Good Travel. Please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Debbie Clarke. And coming to us from Rhode Island, somebody that's also been in the Crest universe for quite some time, the founder of the Blackstone Valley Tourism Council. Please put your hands together for Dr. Robert, a.k.a. Bob Billington.
So, thank you. Am I going to take this one?
Yes, sir. And then we've got 3 right here.
Perfect.
Just make sure you flip them on, guys, and you're good to go. Thank you very much.
I love the segue that we have to this, that we should turn up and be ready to do the work and care. And at a time when it seems like so many people don't care, it's good that whole idea, that whole commitment to care is something that we can hold as a value high. And so I am just thrilled to be here with this group of people. It's like, these are the rock stars of sustainable tourism in a lot of different ways. And so I'm just going to try and keep out of the way as much as I possibly can. I love stories. When I became an academic, I started hanging out with people who like numbers. And it's been a challenge, really. I like telling stories. I love Nancy's presentation where, she was digging into, I'm not going to tell you the numbers. I'm going to tell you something that you'll actually remember. And stories are the sorts of things that we remember. We live stories. Everyone can tell me a Aesop's fable that has guided them through their life. We remember that sort of stuff. I can't remember a grocery list. You give me 5 things that I have to go into the bloody grocery store for, and I'll forget 3 of them, right? But stories, I can remember. And so in this little session that we're going to be talking about here, we're going to be talking about the intersection of stories, of education, and of sustainability. And there aren't any better people that could be bringing this story to us today. So we're going to start off with, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves, to give some sort of bona fides to why the heck they're here, and then we'll go from there. So Bob, can I start with you? Tell us a little bit about where you come from.
Thank you, Jonathon, and thank you all for allowing me to be here today. Obviously, it's a great honor. I grew up in Rhode Island. I still live there. I started in the manufacturing business. My family were manufacturers. That's what I was expected to do. But finally, we got a chance to close the business down. I was very happy to do that in 1985 and get out of the manufacturing business and in the business of trying to bring a community back. And I come from the Blackstone Valley. The Blackstone Valley is a valley that follows the Blackstone River from Worcester, Massachusetts to Pawtucket, Rhode Island. It's about 45 miles long, and it is probably the country's first unsustainable landscape. And I'll get into explaining why that landscape was unsustainable and why we're trying to bring it back to a point of equilibrium. So that's a quick introduction, Jonathon, and thank you.
Fantastic.
All right. Hi, everyone. Tiffany Rhodes. And I think, like many of you in here, I fell into tourism backwards. I didn't start out with a tourism degree and had no concept of that this is an actual profession or job. I started out in hard science as a biologist. I went over to Kenya on a study abroad and studied elephant and rhino populations. And it was there, I think, that I first discovered that ecotourism was the single-handed reason that we still have elephants and rhinos and mountain gorillas on the earth. And so that was a seed, right, planted inside of me. Also, when I was there, as many of us, when you see abject poverty face to face for the first time, it changes your humanity. And I came back completely changed and wanted to go into humanitarian aid. And so I came back from that and I went into cross-cultural studies with the hope to be a humanitarian aid worker. And when I started to do small trips of humanitarian aid work, I realized, again, wow, the power of tourism to kind of help get people out of poverty traps. And so another seed was planted in my mind as far as the power of tourism. And from that, I also was trying to pay off my loan, right, from grad school, as many of us, right, had to do, and I became an adventure guide, right? My parents were like, oh my God, you just get paid to play, but it was the best thing ever, right?
It pays so well.
It didn't pay so well, but I was living the dream. And so I became this adventure guide throughout the United States and an ecotourism guide throughout the world, and that really also taught me the power of travel to change the individual, right, person. That they can confront their fears in these contexts and overcome their fears, and they change, right? As Mark Twain says, travel is fatal to bigotry, you know, and seeing the power of tourism to affect individual change was amazing. So another seed was planted. Fast forward from that, Johnson & Wales University needed someone to teach adventure travel, and I got into teaching with Brian Lavin back there at Johnson & Wales University for the last 10 years, if we can believe it. I taught there for 10 years, and I fell into teaching sustainable tourism and taking my students, future leaders like many of you in here that are going to be future leaders, right, on trips across the world. And so I got to actualize all of this and teach them the power of tourism that we're learning about here at this conference. And so that's kind of how I fell into this. So.
Thanks, Tiffany. I love hearing that story. So I'm Debbie Clarke, and I live on Cape Cod in Harwich, but clearly I'm a wash ashore. Not born and raised here. I grew up on a farm in New Zealand and learned from a very young age how we are deeply interconnected with the land we live on, the seasons, the cycles, and in a small rural community, the value of our interconnectedness and our interreliance on everyone around us. I went on to study education, counseling. I worked in special education here in the United States in public schools and became really interested in what creates change in people. And I have a deep belief that every one of us can change our thinking and our actions and develop ourselves to our fullest potential. I moved from education to travel when I went home to New Zealand and I was riding my bike along a river trail and a little pea waka waka, a little fantail in New Zealand, was flitting beside me, and I was so moved and enchanted. I said, I want everyone to experience this. I want people to have this deep connection with nature. This is what we all need. So I started a travel company, because that's easy to do, right? And it was a challenge, but I loved it. So I've been a tourism business owner for over a decade. COVID collapsed my business, as many other people know what that's like. I work for the Center for Good Travel, and most recently I've become a regenerative practitioner. And so that has been a learning journey to understand how to apply living systems thinking to how I live, how I show up, how I work, and then to now bring those skills and that way of thinking back into tourism again. And so I work with small businesses and DMOs to bring regenerative thinking into how we do our work, because it's always the question, right? How do we do this? So that's where I'm at.
I love listening to people's stories because, you know, our identity is so tied up in the way we talk about ourselves and the way that we move through this journey of life. And so, you know, if that is true for the individual, it's also true for the destination as well. That the stories we talk about here on Cape Cod or in New Zealand or wherever you come from, our stories are how we build meaning and understanding of the places in which we live. Now, one of the blessings of this process has been I've got a chance to have a talk to Bob about some of the work that he did. And what I would like to do is Bob, if I could ask you, I know that you brought together the stories of the Blackstone Valley. Could you tell us a little bit about how you went through that process of really starting the work that you did?
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Sure. So Blackstone Valley was where America's industrial birthplace is. A little town called Pawtucket changed the world by taking what was going on in England, which was mass production by water power, taking that, bringing it to the United States. That created the ability for this valley to power the country. So we became a superpower through through industrialization. Prior to 1790, everything we wanted had to come from England. And then we began production. And that kind of caught fire from Pawtucket all the way to Worcester, then down through the Connecticut River Valley. So this landscape was industrialized. We built everything, cars, boats, all on this idea that we learned how to spin cotton into thread in this little mill in Pawtucket. So fast forward from the 1700s to the 1800s up to the 1940s, things started to slip away. Our economy shifted from out of New England down to the Virginias, then down to Mexico and off in other parts of the world. So disinvestment was taking place in Blackstone Valley, where I grew up. I was in that same business. I was in manufacturing. I couldn't wait to get out of it. I couldn't understand why other places were valuable and visitable, yet my hometown, which had an important role in the building of America, wasn't. But what was the story and what took place there? So we began that process of understanding and learning and telling the story, and it wasn't a great story. I mean, this is where we polluted our landscape heavily. We became unsustainable, and that's because this balance of money or the economy and the environment and people was out of whack. We figured out in Blackstone Valley how to make a lot of money, but we were not kind to workers. It's where the first strikes began, led by women at Slater Mill. Fighting for lesser hours to work and a little bit more pay. So we became unsustainable because we focused on the money part and did not focus on the environment and did not focus on the social aspects. So that story, as brutal as it is, needs to be told. We're not going to varnish it. So we began that process, and probably the most difficult part is when you're working in an environment like Rhode Island. It has great shining stars. Newport, the South County beaches are wonderful. Our city is now a capital city, is now a convention city. But a place like Blackstone was a has-been. So it's really very, very difficult to convince your public officials, those people that are involved and are responsible for making their community better, to understand the value of tourism. So that was our job, and I had to basically go to every community in the Blackstone Valley and ask for their support. And I was thrown out of meetings because there is no tourism here. Why would we give you money to begin the process of developing a program, because no one comes here? Exactly the point. Let's change that. So tourism isn't about supplanting any part of the economy. It's an important part of it, and it has to fit in like a glove.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
So, part of what you're saying is that you started to actually change the story that was being told around Blackstone Valley.
There wasn't a story being told other than it's a has-been. And when your economy goes away, disinvestment begins, buildings become empty, and these buildings are millions of square feet of empty mill space. It becomes a place where anything anything seems good. Any investment seems good, and it could be any of the fast food restaurants. It doesn't matter. You take what you can get. When you're public officials or those that are responsible for that type of allowance have to take whatever they can get, and the landscape starts to change, and not in a good way. So you need to prove the value of the place, and it's a very small, it's a balancing act, one small step at a time. I spent 45 years on this message. I think there's another 45 years of work to be done before we can look at the Blackstone Valley as coming back to equilibrium.
Yeah.
Can't swim in our river, can't plant in the ground along the river, can't eat the fish from the river. Now, we've had the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and we've been working on the Blackstone River cleanup for over 55 years, and we're still not there. We're going to need another 55 years. No, what I tell the local people is no child should live in this country and not be able to swim in a river that is close to them, or drink the water, fish, swim. It's not the right thing.
Okay, so if I get it right, it's not a quick fix, right? So coming around, I want to talk to Debbie, because I know that, Debbie, you have put some thought into how this process of, I think that there is a positive story coming out on the change of the way we think about the Blackstone Valley and those experiences, and you've put some thought into how communities can change their story or can tap into their story. Could you share some of those ideas with us?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And I think we talked about discerning the story or uncovering the story, right? And we've heard that, I think Nancy, who was just on the panel before, said, who has this place been and who is this place now and who do we want this place to become? And so if we begin to understand our places, and when I say places, I'm talking about the whole living ecosystem. I'm talking about the oceans, I'm talking about the rivers, the wetlands, I'm talking about the people, I'm talking about everything that makes up this living ecosystem. Because we are all living beings, right? We heard that in the opening panel from Dr. Jonas, that we are all interconnected living beings. So when we start to think about our place that way, then it opens up the possibility for us to do a deep dive to really understand who our place is. What's the geologic story of our place? How did that inform the hydrology, the biology, the sociology, the culture, the myths and stories that all came from that? So we have processes that story our place. And so whether that's led by a DMO or whether that's led by a community, the way that we understand the value of our place, I heard Jonathon talk about that earlier yesterday as well. To understand the value of our place, we need to know it. We need to come into relationship with it. Dr. Jonas talked about Indigenous cultures have thousands and thousands of years of passing down the stories of their place and what our role as humans is in that story to participate with nature, to understand how to live in harmony with the land and the water. So we have those skills that we can do. We can create processes that bring people into that story to understand who we are so that we can manifest the potential of this place into a future vision of who we want to become. So there's design processes that allow us to do that. And then we can develop and what that does is it expands our capacity to care, right? When we know a place, like I've just got to know Tiffany, and I'm starting to really care for her because we're getting to know each other, right? And you don't really care for much unless you know it. I hate to admit it, right? But through a process of coming to know a living being, our place, our communities, another person, we expand our capacity to care. And when we expand our capacity to care, then we're more likely to take action on behalf of that living being. So we can intentionally design a future state that we're working towards. We can really uplift the stories of what's happening, of how we're working across the whole community, not just tourism. And I'm not talking tourism just yet, right? I'm talking about who our place is and then what role tourism can play in that. I think Samantha talked about that as well. We're not talking about tourism, we're talking about communities. And so who is our place? Who do we want it to become? And the role of stories in that, and the role that we can see for ourselves in that larger story of our place, activates our will and our capacity to care. And one of the things I heard a lot yesterday was, we have a lot of solutions. We have all the solutions, actually. But what's lacking is political will. And politics is not them. Politics is us, right? The tourism sector is not this big abstract thing. We are. And so as we expand our own capacity to care, as we come into relationship with our places, we can then invite other people into that relationship.
I love the idea of a destination as a tapestry of stories that we can tap into. I want to bring Tiffany into the conversation. Now, if you've seen The Princess Bride, you know that the story is just so much more enriched by Peter Falk talking to little baby Fred Savage, right? In between the action in the movie, because it's all about the audience. And one of the things that Tiffany has been working on is the audience and how receptive it is to the story that is being told. And so, Tiff, if I can get you to just tell us a little bit about that work and how it might fit into this discussion about storytelling.
Yeah, well, sure. Well, first of all, I want to just say that Bob undersold the Blackstone River, because I have a bulldog who can't swim very well, and her very first swim in her life was in the Blackstone, and I worried that she was going to glow in the dark later. Yeah. So
Give it a few years.
yeah. So that was, my experience with the Blackstone. But so I am more on the side of, as an educator, I'm trying to rear up the next generation of tour operators, tour guides. And in that process, right, I teach this class called Tour Management and Operations. And in that, I take the students on an international experience. And so they get twofold. They get to pretend to be a guide for 24 hours, and they also are a tourist the rest of the time. And when I first took over this program, nothing against the professor that I went with, but the program was really different. And I went on the first trip, and I realized it was just a glorified spring break. And you can imagine, right? You put a bunch of 20-year-olds in an international destination, maybe in the tropics, and they're 19, 20, and they can drink now, like legally. Oh man, right? It's just chaos. And you think, well, this isn't very responsible tourism. This isn't what we're trying to teach this next generation. And so as I took over this program, each term I tried to get better and better in changing their visitor behaviors while they traveled to be better guests where they went. And there was a lot of processes that I went through on ways to teach them. And also how to be good guides, right? And that's the other thing that we need to teach as far as our, how to be really good guides. And what I would always teach them is that guides, I always think, right, Lord of the Rings, anyone out there still watch the Lord of the Rings or remember it? My students are now not knowing the Lord of the Rings reference as much, which is sad. But, right, Frodo was the main character in the story, and he was the one on the journey. It was his story, right? But there were people that came along Frodo throughout it to help them and assist him on his journey, like Gandalf, right? And I realized that that is what a tour guide is. They're the Gandalf in the story, right? They're not Frodo. They're not front and center. It's not their story. And so Gandalf, I teach my students to come in and help them be the most successful guests in their future trips, right? To be the Gandalf, offer them wisdom and guidance and tell the right stories to inspire them to become better guests where they travel. And in that, I realize also on the flip side, how do we then, how does that happen then on the ground? Do the kids stop treating it like spring break? Do they start to actually be responsible tourists while they're traveling? And it was really interesting to see that each technique, right, and to see how well it changed their behaviors. I think the most powerful tool that I realized that worked was storytelling. And I know that I've been like learning about what responsible tourism is, sustainable. I think many of you have said, right, we have a terminology problem. Because if you talk to a kid and you say, what does sustainable tourism mean to you? I think Ketty said it, right? It means recycle, right, while you travel. Don't use plastic. That's what a sustainable tourist does. And I'm like, that's not really what we're going after here. So if you use the word responsible tourist, and you ask the kids, hey, what do you think responsible tourists mean? Do you know what they say every time? Oh, well, that's someone who doesn't forget their passport. And I'm like, yeah, okay. That is a responsible person. But even so, every time someone forgets their passport in the hotel, and we're always trekking back to get it somehow, right? So I'm like, okay, that terminology isn't working out as well as either. And that's when, Dr. Vinci Ho, right, taught me this word regenerative. And now my new friend, Debbie, also is teaching me on regenerative, and I'm starting to really love that word. And I think that's going to be the future, and this regenerative storytelling that's emerging out of this, I think is the future to change visitor behavior. And what I meant to bring it up here, but I have a typology of tourists, because the one thing, as I've been doing this for 10 years and leading these trips, I started to realize that my students as tourists weren't all the same, that they were different, right? And I couldn't just do one solution as a patch for every tourist that I took on these trips. These tourists are not all the same. And so I came up with this typology of tourists that's in the back you guys can look at. And I realized if we're trying to get everyone to be this sustainable tourist, this responsible tourist, even better, this regenerative tourist, someone who makes the place better where when they travel to that destination, that how do we get people there if they're not all the same? And I came up with this tourist typology where I compared people's behavioral intentions with their understanding of what it means to be a good, high-value, good guests, right, in the place. How do they go to this place and build community with the locals and build a relationship with them, right? And I realized, so if you compare behavioral intentions and knowledge, I came up with 4 categories. You have the tourist, right, that has a high level of behavioral intentions, wants to be an amazing guest and build a relationship with the local community, and also understands what that means. And so, right, that's our responsible tourist. That's what our high value tourist. Over here on my typology, I had there's a group of tourists out there that really want to be amazing guests. They want to do the responsible, sustainable, regenerative thing. They want to be good guests to their hosts, right? But they have no understanding of what that actually means. To them, maybe that means going to an all-inclusive resort and watching a cultural show. They think that that's being a good, responsible tourist. And I realized that is the group of visitors, right, that we need to educate. Those are the ones and storytelling is an amazing way to educate someone to become a responsible tourist. And so all of you, I know many of you out there are using storytelling. I know we have the influencers telling these brilliant stories, educating, right, people on how to do that. And so I called those people teachable tourists because I think that we as an industry can teach them how to be amazing guests, right? Down here on my typology, it was my group of students, right? They're studying sustainable tourism. They know what it means, by the end of this program, and they're still not doing it. And so they have a high level of understanding, but they don't have the behavioral intentions to be good guests where they travel. And I labeled them pleasure-seeking tourists. And so changing those students into becoming more responsible travelers when they traveled is a little trickier. You can't just simply educate them, right? You need to somehow shift their attitudes, and build maybe in our tours, in our guiding, in our supply side, build in the social norms that they would feel weird if they weren't acting responsibly, right? So we're shifting their attitudes, we're embracing a social norm, creating a social norm where they want to be responsible while they, and then the other thing is giving them the ability to have that self-identity that they want to become that. And I think that is where storytelling has been the most powerful tool to change. It's a powerful tool for teaching, but it's also a powerful tool to inspire these pleasure-seeking tourists to become responsible tourists. And that's what I've seen in my years of doing this.
Outstanding. And so, any good storyteller is going to adjust their story for the audience. That we have a story to tell, and we've built these stories up, but we've got different audiences, and we're going to adjust and move as we go. I want to just sort of take a different approach now and think about those stories that we do create, right? And Bob, I know that you have created the positive stories in the Blackstone Valley. You've worked with how does that work? How did you do that over time to sort of build the momentum that is positive there?
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm just thinking, though, of Tiffany's work and her typology of travelers, tourists, and I wonder if we could adopt that to policy makers and policy shapers, because really what we're talking about is making places or place making. And I'd love to look at that and figure out which official, whether in planning or in government, where do they fit? Because they're the ones that we really need to work with to help shape a policy for a place. What we found, Jonathan, going back to your question, is that the stories are there. I represented 10 communities. Each one has a place, a preservation group, a historical society. All the stories are there, and they're in the records, but they're not being told. They don't have the ability to get them out. And I'm not saying every organization is that way, but they needed encouragement, and they needed to know that their village or their town or their city has a story to tell that would be interesting for the local people, the people from the region, the nation, and probably some of those stories internationally. So it's a matter of galvanizing them and working with them and bringing with getting those stories out, because they have the history, but with tourism, we are trying to take that message and spread the message for them. So that's essentially how we got the story right. We didn't have to make it up. We didn't have to do the research. It was all there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that we're not making up stuff, right? That the stories are there, and our job is to uncover them, to reveal them, right? True brands that you trust, destinations that you trust, aren't telling you to be something different, that they are something different. They're tapping into the cultural stories, the environmental stories, the living stories of their own community. And I think you've probably got some experiences from that.
Yeah, I think it's, we did some work with a region in New Zealand, Northland, and what's interesting about that region in New Zealand is it's the first region in New Zealand that our indigenous people voyaged to and landed on and lived for thousands of years, and it's the first area that colonizers came down, the settlers came down to that area as well. And so it's an area of really deep, long-held stories, and because during this workshop we had a lot of our indigenous people there, and so there's the stories of the land that they know how to listen to. And so this is one thing I encourage, that if you don't understand how to listen to the energies of the land and the water, and you don't know how to do this, there are people who do. And so work with those people as well to bring forth the stories, to discern, to uncover from our perspective what those long-standing stories are of the land, of the people as we came and who we are today. And so when we worked with Northland to understand the story of their place, it became really apparent that the regional story was a different story than every small community, right? And I think this is relevant to the Cape as well. The regional story of Cape Cod versus the small community stories. Everyone feels they have a small story around that. But the landscape can really inform us around where sort of, how big our place is. This is part of our uncovering of story when we do story of place process. You know, how big is here? What are the mountains, or in this case, you know, where are the waterways that help us discern how big this place is and what the real story of this place is? And through that process we led with Northland, it became really clear that there were also some stories that could only be told by certain people, that we don't all have the right to tell particular stories. And so what eventuated in Northland was that the small areas all really got a deeper understanding of their own story and how they could become part of that story in their place, and how they could also uplift the other small areas in Northland and encourage their visitors. You need to go there to hear that story. So very often we work in competitive ways, right? This is like the antithesis of what we heard from Dr. Jonas in the beginning. Like, how do we move to more relational reciprocity? And so in Northland it was beautiful because everyone acknowledged and respected the other stories of the other places, yet recognized they had a regional story. The settler people, the colonizers, realized that we had a different story to our indigenous people, and so we had really difficult, challenging conversations about, this is our story to tell. Some of our indigenous people were saying, this is our story to tell, it's not your story. And one of the Pakeha women, the European descendant woman, said, I'm now of this place too, and so I'm part of the story, so what's my story? I don't want to step on your story. So it brings a real deep understanding to who we are as people in our place and the story of our place. And when we deepen that understanding, we're then able to engage and be part of the story, and we are then able to design experiences around those stories of our place in alignment. You know, destination planning is definitely a part of this. Destination plans, I like to call them community stewardship plans, so that they're driven by the community first, and then we look at what tourism's role is in that. But everything then becomes aligned to the story of place, and then the experiences that we intentionally design from that understanding of who our place is helps not only the residents and the businesses and everyone else participate and deepen their relationship with place and their role in contributing to place, right, as interconnected, relational, reciprocal living beings. But then they were able to create invitations through storytelling to values-aligned visitors, right? And so that's where the tourism piece came in. And they were able to ready the audience. They were able to craft the narrative that says, this is who we are, these are the values we stand on, this is our story of place, this is what we hold dear. And if you want to come and be part of this relationship with us, if you want to come and join in the story with us, please come. And so you're already shaping visitor behavior around that story of who you are.
And we want to then, right, prepare visitors to be receptive of that story, so that there can be this beautiful, we've been talking about this all morning, right, this beautiful relationship and community between the guest and the host, right? And it's, as the tourism industry, preparing our guests to be receptive of that story of place.
And one more thing I just want to jump in with. This is our superpower as tourism people. Most small businesses who get into tourism do it because they love their place, right? Most of us are here because we love our place, like, and we care about it. We have a deep personal connection. And so when we love our place, we're willing to act on behalf of our place, right? And so that really shapes how we talk about our place, how we invite others into that process with us. And finding non-traditional tourism hosts, community hosts, is imperative. We've talked about cross-sector collaborations here. there are people in your places who are so impassioned about their place. They are the local hosts that can really help shift mindsets, and that's a superpower we have in tourism. We can bring people when they're open, really ready for new experiences outside of their daily drudgery, into a new experience that can help shift that mindset and come to a place and say, wow, look at Cape Cod, look at how all of these people are working together, collaborating across sectors. These stories of what's happening here are amazing.
Yeah, I think that the stories I tell about myself are about my identity, right? And build my identity. And that's what we're doing here in Destinations. We're creating the identity that we will live to. And, as we wrap up this last conversation here, I really don't want to leave without sort of talking about the idea of virtuous cycles, right? That as we start to tell ourselves we're okay, we become better. As we start to, as individuals, as we start to tell ourselves the stories of pride, I came from a bad place, but this is what I am today, and this is what I will be in the future. And I think you probably have some examples of virtuous cycles of positive feedback loops.
Thank you. What comes to mind is this idea that we don't have to be the most popular place in Rhode Island or the most popular place in the United States. What we have to be is a good place to live. If the people that are in our destination, in whatever region we're working with, if we're making life better for them, visitors are going to come, and they're going to come at a level that is proper. It's not important to be seeking to be bringing the most visitors to your place. You want to make your place the best place for the people that live there. And it will be a great place for people to visit. Maybe not at the highest levels. That's not important. What's important is that it's a great place. And if we're going to do anything with tourism, we have to do it for good and not unleash something on a local population that is not willing to deal with that.
So it's very much about being true to yourself and understanding your own story. Look, I hope that you've found some insights from the conversation that we've had here. I think that it's time to take some questions. So if anyone has any questions for any of these folks, please raise your hand now. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering if you can think of any places that may be a good case study for a community that has sort of like many stories and like overlapping stories. So I live in Provincetown, so we've talked about that a few different times in the Cape. And we have a really unique story around going from whaling to Portuguese fishing and being a really big sort of fishing community. We have an amazing story about the LGBTQ community and artists and the AIDS pandemic and ultimately, inclusion today. And then, we have the indigenous people story and that being about environment and being, becoming a national park and protected land. So there's many stories, but it's not one story. And so I'm trying to figure out, are there other places where you feel like there's sort of overlapping or maybe even conflicting or complementary stories in one?
Everywhere, right? And I think that that's true. You guys?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was Northland as well, just that they were able to align around a concept of who they were. So this is true of everywhere, right? That there are, especially with the migration and all the different, it's evolution, right? It's change. And so when we talk about a story of place, we're not trying to say everyone has to ascribe to this one story. We gather all the stories, we bring all the stories in, and it's a very intentional, deep, lengthy, messy, difficult, challenging process, because there is competing stories. But what we're trying to do is discern a concept. We're trying to discern some alignment that allows everyone's story to be brought forth. And then there's a concept of who this place is as we think about who we want to become in the future. And so I'm not going to hazard a guess at what P-Town's concept of is that everyone can rally around and buy into. That would be discerned through the process of everyone's stories coming together. And we've heard before that it's challenging work. Anyone who's doing this community engagement work in a real, meaningful, deep way, it's uncomfortable. I think Rhode Island, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, you said be willing to be uncomfortable. And I would add, be willing to not have the answers, because we live in a culture where everyone values answers and solutions, and what we need to value for a little bit longer is questions. And we need to engage in the process of holding questions and not having a clue about the answer. We are living in a very complex time. Sam talked about complex adaptive systems. So we have to understand our complex adaptive system in P-Town or whichever place we're from, really get a deep understanding of that so that we can come to some alignment around the concept of what can we all rally around, what's our guiding star, and that becomes the story we're telling. So it's not one story that we all say, yes, that's our story. It's more of a concept that aligns us.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
I think that if you think of, what are the, you've got a portfolio, you've got a tapestry of stories, but there's going to be some key themes that resonate with many people telling all of those stories. And if you can find that, and we certainly have some destination stewardship plans out there at the moment that really tap into the values of the community, and then each of these stories illuminates it. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, Jonathan.
Question for Tiffany, but for any of the rest of you as well. Your own story about the rowdy 20-year-olds and telling them the story to move them out of that. And in my career, there was a time when I was traveling and I was a rowdy 50-year-old.
That's what I am now.
I think a lot about the push-pull within the tourist universe between we're getting away from the job, we just want to have some fun. That's a legitimate feeling. But then how do you begin to shift that into thinking more about where you are and not suggest that you can't have fun, you have to be responsible. So tell me some of the stories or
Yeah.
approaches you take
Yeah.
with your students.
It's actually quite amazing when I look back at those 10 years of leading that trip with my students, right? In the beginning, those spring break trips compared to these last ones that I've led that were really meaningful, engaged, relational community amazingness, right? That I would actually say that my later students had a much better time, actually. They had way more fun. The last trip that I led to Peru, the experience, the engagement that they had with the local community, at every type of local community that they engaged with. I mean, we were up in the Rainbow Mountain engaging with that local community. We spent time with an indigenous community that Planetera actually set up. These beautiful, enriching, and those students came back. I actually interviewed all of them when I came back, and the heart pouring out that happened was amazing compared to the kids that were just like, they didn't have that same experience. So I think shifting the traveler's mindset and attitudes to make them realize maybe by telling them a different story of travel, right? To get them to embrace a different story of travel so that they end up choosing to do that type of travel and then when they come back, they're going to realize, like, wow, that was amazing. And it was such a better time than my spring break, if that makes any sense. Yeah. I mean, one last thing. Debbie and I talked about this. This book, I'm at a new university now. I forgot to say that part of the story. I'm actually at a new college. I know. I started to worry that I was talking too much about my story, so I'm like, cut it, Debbie. But I'm actually at Paul Smith
She was worried she wouldn't have anything to say.
Well, yeah, I'm doing okay. But so I'm now in the Adirondacks, and I think I forget the person's name that just won the award. Bethany? Stephanie? Yes, Stephanie. I resonate with that so much that now I'm in the Adirondacks and I want to get back to nature. And it's really been transforming my life. And this new college that I'm teaching, I'm going to lead these kids on international trips going forward. And the cool thing that has shifted at this new college is they actually are teaching the kids to come up with a land ethic. And they're making them read this book. And, in my class, we read the first chapter of Sky Woman, and it completely even changed me. If you guys haven't read Reading Sweetgrass, or even the first chapter, it's a different creation story, and it completely changed my perspective, and that's what I mean. The power of story can really alter our fundamental core values and our attitudes, which will then shift us into different people, and I think this was amazing, and to add that to tourism curriculum, is just incredible. So, and to add this, and then to think, all of my students would tell you, if they were here, the ones that went to Peru, they would all tell you, all of them, because in the interview, they all said it. Tour operators need to do the same thing that they did before their trip, so that when they went to Peru, that they knew how to really get the most out of their experience, and that tour operators should embrace these regenerative stories making and educational platforms.
I just wanted to say this was, if you're not familiar, Dr. Jonas had the clips of Robin Wall Kimmerer, right? And this is one of her books. And so she is obviously she's First Nations, and she is also a botanist and a scientist, and so this book is a lot about two-eyed seeing. It's about merging of Western science with Indigenous thinking, and when we talk about activating our agency and our will, this is a pretty transformative, powerful book, and makes you think about.
So if you can't see that book, that's Braiding Sweetgrass that we're talking about. If you're in the back and you can't see what we're talking about. Look, I think we're almost ready to wrap up. I just want to push back, Jonathon. As Americans, we over-index on on our individual role in things, right? The rugged individualist, right? And we're going to change everything ourselves. And I would just suggest to you that we spend a lot of time saying, people should travel like this or they should travel like that. I don't want to stop people from having a good time going to the beach, right? So who's responsible for making sure that travel is responsible if they want to just go to the beach? That's us. We need to design experiences so it's difficult to impossible for them to behave bad, right? It's not about them having to be a better person, although that would be good, but maybe it's about us thinking about how can we create these experiences so they can't be bad. And that's part of the priming that I think you do as you go through. Look, please put your hands together for these folks. They have shared an incredible set of insights. Thank you, Wes. It's over to you.